good old. That's my strong recommendation.
Do you have any tips as to how to not do that?
No.
Because spending a lot of time with teenagers, I don't think is going to help me.
No, that's not going to get you there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the killers and $100 billionaires, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dogs and cats, children, as well as babies. It's the Driveline Academy podcast, the world's most dangerous youth baseball podcast with the most disjointed intro that I think perhaps we've ever done. My name is Deven Morgan, Director of Baseball at Driveline, founder of the Driveline Academy, and I'm joined, as per usual, by my brother, my partner, my co-host, Driveline Academy Assistant Director of Driveline Academy International Man Mystery, Jeremy Tecktiel. But wait, a third guest appears. Connor White, Director of High Performance for Driveline, is joining us today. And if you would be surprised, we're going to talk about some strength stuff. We're going to talk about some long-term athletic development stuff. We're going to talk about the combination of athleticism and skill, because if there's anything that gets under-indexed for more in youth baseball than athletic development, it's athletic development. But before that, we will do housekeeping as per usual. Axbat.com, code DL20, as in, oh man, we've done Detroit before.
Yeah, but after last night, they kind of deserve another shout out.
Sure, yeah, we'll do Detroit Lions 2-0. Get yourself 20% off at axbat.com. I'm just leaning into it, man. I'm a Campbell guy. DL20, axbat.com. We get you 20% off. 10% of that goes to us, goes directly into our scholarship fund and academy, which we then give away to kids to be able to do this thing for either free or less money, because we believe that that's a thing that's necessary in youth baseball, because the stuff is expensive enough as it is. So get your 20% off and then do some good for the universe. Help us do some good. Help us help you. Help us help everyone. Boy, rough start today. Rough start. What else do we have for you? We have the Youth Power Bat and the Youth Underload Smash Bat, respectively, the best $99 or $79 you could spend on just hitting development. If you're going to go to a large national retailer that might rhyme with Rick's.
I had a friend growing up called it Richards.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So go to Richards. And take a look at their baseball training aisle and see what's there. I'm not shy. I'm not going to be shy about the fact that I'm pretty sure that the Power Bat and the Youth Underload Smash Bat are just better tools because how they work, right? It's not strapping some device to your kid. It's not some esoteric thing that you're just hoping it's going to work. These are discrete skills. You can discretely train bat speed and it will improve. You can discretely train the skill of moving a small barrel, a tiny diameter barrel accurately, and get better at that specific skill. These are things that you can do. Those are tools that allow you to develop those traits, and you can find them at drivelinebaseball.com. Other than that, Skills to Skill Complete Youth Baseball Training Manual. And you know what? We're going to start today's pod with a little bit of a rant.
Okay.
So shout out to Trey Hannum on Twitter. We had some stuff out there about cueing for kids. I posted a screenshot from the book, from the Skills to Scale Complete Youth Baseball Training Manual, one of its several hundreds of pages that had the hitting specifically cues in it. And Trey was a good enough dude that he doesn't owe us anything. He doesn't work for Driveline, and he saw that stuff and he's like, oh, this is pretty tight, and put it out to his number of followers. So that then got a lot of traction online, which is cool because again, it's not that coaches shouldn't cue kids. It's that you want that kid to be cued in a function or in a way in competition that actually helps them perform. And I think those of us that are here and those of you who have a critical eye towards how you've coached or how you've seen other people coach have heard cues given to kids that are real bad.
Yes.
Real bad. And it's everything from the generic get your back elbow up, get your front foot down, keep your head still, to incredibly esoteric in-game coaching, to intentionally negative coaching. And what we put out in the book was not that. What we put out in the book is the way that we generally want coaches to think about a landscape of cues that put kids in a position to compete, right? So, for example, hunt what you like. I used to say that stuff all the time in Little League. And the point was, if you're in a positive count, right, 3-0, 2-0, 3-1 or whatever, I want you to hunt the thing that you're like, right? That's a process, right? I'm trying to communicate to a child in an age-appropriate fashion that I want them to engage in the process of trying to figure out a pitch that they can do some damage on, right? I'm doing that because I don't want to tell them, one that I hate, it's got to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that cue. I hate that cue because I think it puts kids on the back foot about not being aggressively looking for a pitch that they can actually hit, to instead like, is it perfect?
Right.
Is it perfect? What elite competitor do you know that approaches competition like, I don't know, like jumpy and nervous?
None elite competitors. But I mean, the truth there is the coach probably doesn't want him swinging and being aggressive in that situation, right? That's why he's saying be perfect and let it be perfect, because he doesn't.
You're right.
Like, I would love for you to get walked here.
You're right. Yeah.
So it better be perfect, or you're going to swing at this one.
Yeah. So like the chapter says hitting cues, not cues to give a kid to make them passive. Right?
Correct.
It's hitting cues.
Right.
So shout out to Trey for putting that out there. I think anytime that we get outside of our little like insular community of data-driven, development-driven youth baseball, and you get that type of like the assist from somebody like that online, it's really cool. I really shout out to Trey. I'm sending him a book for free. So some of the other cues that are on that page, right? Loud barrel, hunt what you like, find a gap, aggressive in the zone. Again, aggressive in the zone, I will grant that borders a little bit closer to gotta be perfect. I understand that, but it's not that. And I'm encouraging aggression on something in the zone. And I'm still, what I'm trying to communicate to a kid is like a posture towards competition and a little bit of like, hey, be aware, like make sure you're swinging at something in the zone, aggressive in the zone. Does that mean that the cue is perfect and 10 times out of 10, they are going to execute the cue perfectly? Hello, my name is Deven Morgan. Let me welcome you to youth baseball. Doesn't work that way. But as a coach, that's what I'm trying to put forward. Ugly swings matter. That's my guy's invention. I love that one.
Leon.
Shout out to
lost
Academy
it
Leon
yesterday because he had not heard that yet. And I said that, I think, to like Ben, who was hitting before him.
Yeah.
And he was just like, "Did you really just say that?" It's like, yeah. And Koba's like, "Yeah, welcome to Jeremy's team.
Yeah.
Go out there, take some ugly swings.
Ugly swings matter. Yeah. Hey, 2-2 count, 3-2 count, 0-2 count, 1-2 count.
Yeah.
Ugly swings matter. We're acknowledging the count construction, right? You are kind of in a negative count, but you need to be able to do something productive. And again, like to those of you that like to disparage what you do or what we do, right? And they think that all we do is we want to have kids take G-hacks all the time and try to hit every ball 700 feet at like 157 miles an hour exit velocity. Ugly swings matter is a practical application of the idea that like not every swing is going to be a 3-0 A swing G-hack.
Right.
That's just not what the game is. So it gets out there and it gets out there to the point that like the view counts start approaching like 100,000 people or whatever. And it's typically around that point that like my stuff starts to fall outside of the range of people that like I know and interact with on a daily basis. And it's people who are like a little bit different. And shout out to you, one different person who wants to tell me that like these cues are too specific. They're too specific in that like I am preaching a result. I'm trying to tell kids a result, and I'm not telling them how to achieve that result.
That's correct.
You're right.
That is the intent of that. Yeah.
You're right. Because one of the most disastrous things you can do in competition is try to teach. Competition is for competing.
Right.
Training is for teaching. It's two different environments. To make this relevant to like a strength side, right? If I'm powerlifting, if I'm teaching the movement and I'm building capacity leading up to the meet, that's the environment for that. On the day of the meet, you pull what you pull, right? Like that's competition. So this person purports themselves to be some sort of like coach of elite athletes. And then I ask a very simple question. Like, you got any science behind that? You got any data behind that? Because what she threw at me was like, well, this doesn't serve neurophysics. Like, all right, man. I mean, I thought we were talking about teaching like prepubescent children to hit. But I will agree that, like, hey, if there's some insight for me to be learned from neuroscience, like, let's get into it, man. My life got changed because I went down this rabbit hole about Jean Piaget. So, like, I get it. So when I say,
we literally had a developmental psychologist on 3 weeks ago.
yeah, David Yeager was here. Science of, from 10 to 25, the science of motivating young children or whatever. I will get into the stuff. So when I say, like, hey, if you're going to castigate the stuff that we teach, I'd like something more concrete about what exactly we're doing wrong, so I can learn. And then when you just go, well, I've just got a lot of anecdotal experience. Like, me too, and I'm pretty sure I have more anecdotal experience than you do coaching kids. So what are we talking about?
She's trying to cue you.
Yeah, man.
Not efficiently.
No, you're not efficiently cueing me. Cue me to attack a hittable pitch. God, social media.
Hear me out, though.
Yes.
Stay off it.
I know. It's the trap, though, right? Is like
the ultimate trap.
You gotta be in the water. Like you're gonna get wet.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to communicate to people, and it's less specific than this, right? If you're one of the 174,000 people that have listened to this podcast so far, and shout out to you guys, because that's a crazy number to say. That's an insane number to say. And that type of stuff makes me really happy about where the direction of things are going. Because it's like, it's, building steam with a grain of salt. Shout out to anybody that bought that old DJ Shadow album back in the day. As I get this podcast in a more and more esoteric direction. DJ Shadow? No? Soul Sides Records? Babylon Beach? Okay. Anyways.
If you're a listener and you got all those, shoot him an email. Make him feel a little better.
Yeah, man. If you were like a Quantum Records aficionado from like the Bay Area and Gift of Gab and all those guys. Anyways, boy, let's get specific. So, Mr. White, I think you and I both know that there's nothing understood less in youth baseball than the link between athleticism and skill.
Yeah.
I'm not
Is
sure.
Is that specific to just youth baseball?
I was about to say, I think you could take that more broad.
Yeah.
You could even take that outside. You could even remove the baseball. Like, that's just sports.
Yeah, sport.
And I'm not sure. I truly don't know how we landed here. Like and again, to bring it a little bit more specific to baseball, I know that there was a time where our game maybe appeared to be a little bit more on the skill side and less on the athleticism side, right? Like Frank Viola existed, Bartolo Colon exists. I'm aware of these dudes.
That dude can produce force, and you can't convince me otherwise.
Facts. Maybe those aren't even the best examples, right? It's just like there was an era of our game where of those dudes...
I saw a video this weekend of John Kruk giving someone
in the locker
tour of the Phillies weight room, and like pointing out things in the weight room. He's like, "This is where I used to sit and eat pizza after games, like anything but working out and getting in better shape." And like, this is I can't remember. I think maybe Lenny Dykstra. Mm-hmm. This is the corner he would sit in and put towels all around himself so he'd spit tobacco into like the towels. Like, yeah, they didn't use the weight room for weight in any real sense. Most of them.
And even in those eras, you had guys like the Nolan Ryans of the world that were like pioneers of early strength training in baseball.
Sure.
So it's strange to me that in the 40 years that have passed, right, since the 80s, we have guys who had outlier career results who strength trained. That has been distillated to the point that basically everybody does that in some form or another. But at the amateur level, in the high school level, I can't tell you how many times I talk to parents that are like, yeah, well, he's just not lifting yet. Why? Like, why? How did we get here? Where did we get this idea that like strength training was something that is almost treated like it's destructive to young athletes. You know, that's a crazy thing. That's a crazy thing to have the highest level of our sport see dudes who are prodigious athletes and have great sport specific skills because of it. And then we look at younger athletes and we're like, yeah, you can't do that yet.
The one I think of all the time is Tyler O'Neill.
Bro.
Because I heard many times when he was in the minor leagues that he was legitimately too strong to play Major League Baseball. Like it would get he wouldn't be able to swing or throw properly because he was too strong. And I just I didn't understand it then. I understand it a lot less now. But other than they had no information other than oh, that guy doesn't look like a lot of baseball players. Like that's probably going to be a detriment to him. It's like that. You have no idea.
I mean, think about the most jacked dudes.
Tyler
O'Neill, Barry Bonds, Ken Caminiti, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire.
Are we getting into a steroids discussion or?
I'm trying to be parallel to that. The point that I'm trying to make is that those dudes are crazy jacked and they weren't bad. Right?
Correct.
So if I'm a baseball
the problem with
coach,
a lot of those examples is incorrectly, but someone might throw at you that those guys were good at baseball long before they got jacked. Right? There's a lot of videos of skinny Barry Bonds.
Sure.
Having the skill to do it.
But skinny Barry Bonds
got bigger and didn't get worse.
That's my point.
Yeah.
And he didn't get worse for a really long time.
For a super long time.
When we look at the career war graphs, if you got Mays, Bonds, and Ken Griffey Jr., where he's tracking with them, great until 30. And then it just goes flat. And Bonds kind of upticks a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So who were the baseball players that got big and strong and got worse? Right? Who would that have to be? Or is this just correlation, not causation, right? That somebody's skills got worse and they also happen to get bigger. So somebody was like, oh, well, you got worse because you got big. I don't understand the root of it.
I don't know that we'll ever understand the root. My assumption is more along the lines of guys like Aaron Judge, who are just massive and really strong, who can do things on the skill side that because of their athleticism and their strength, they are outliers, but they never develop enough on the skill side to carry that outlier tool to the majors.
Yeah.
So then the assumption is
that's why.
Yeah, right? The assumption is, oh, it's because you were big and strong that's why you, and it's Aaron Judge was really bad when he was a rookie, and he had some high minor league strikeout totals, which he has massively cut down on, which allowed him to have a probably Hall of Fame career. He didn't cut down on the strikeout totals because he stopped lifting weights.
Yeah.
Or got less strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that in my head, at least, that's a lot of what it's tied to is these big athletic guys who were good at baseball because they were big and athletic, but never adapted on the skill side. So now it's become a cautionary tale for big athletic guys who, because a lot of what scouting is pattern matching.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So you're scouting a guy I've seen this guy 3 times before.
Yep.
The first 3 times I saw a 6'7" guy that's 280 pounds, he never figured out how to hit a baseball.
Yeah.
Which means that this 4th guy, probably the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And it's not because of this swing or anything with the swing characteristics. We're just, the easiest thing is I'm going to pin it on the fact that this guy's really big and really strong.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, Connor, I did not do the best job of introducing you to our audience. So, Connor White, otherwise known as Whitey.
Yep.
Got his baseball reference page pulled up?
No.
Don't pull it up.
No.
Okay.
But I think that's I think that's a relevant point here, right? Is that your playing career didn't end that long ago. So I guess my question to you is to kind of set this discussion a little bit, set the floor for it. You're growing up in
Woodinville, little northeast of here.
Little local Woodinville guy.
Yep.
You're growing up in Woodinville, you're playing ball. At what point did strength training or athletic training or anything you would put under that umbrella be something that you kind of connected the dots of this is going to help me on the sports side?
Somewhere towards the before high school for sure. Somewhere in middle school, just in touch with a local guy that had worked as a hitting trainer previously at the facility that I would hit at.
Okay.
That was getting started in strength and conditioning, and just started doing a little bit of work with him. Kind of probably was 14, 15, in that window, which is actually a great time to have started it.
Yep.
And he's still working up in the area. Curtis Van Wyck does a great job up there, and just got really lucky to have a really good strength coach right where I was living.
Yeah.
Right away, right at a pretty critical time to have done that. Obviously the best times today, or the best times yesterday, next best times today.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean right in line with the growth spurt, and we can get into that conversation too and that stuff. But just transformative, having it being a pretty shot up pretty quick, but then just lanky, underdeveloped, was never prior to that a super high skill guy, but I just really wanted it and put a ton of time into getting better at throwing, hitting, building those properties. And so then just that was kind of the gas pedal.
So when you start doing training, how quickly do you see that resolve itself into some pretty definitive effect on the skill side?
Pretty quickly. And I mean, it really depends on the individual, because kind of the conversation that led into this, where we're talking about those big guys, low skill, high physical, low technique guys, right? Those guys, if you're already a freak, doing more work to become more of a freak isn't going to influence your game that quickly.
Right.
A little bit of skill work is probably going to go a long way.
Right.
The opposite is where I would say most 12 to 14-year-olds are.
Yeah.
Where they've been playing the sport probably as long as they can remember. They have some degree of motor competency, but they got no gas in the tank on the physical side. And for the reason that their body isn't developed to yet. Yeah. But now that they're getting into that time, the changes that are happening in their body are so big for motor learning, so big for setting the stages of what's going to come next, that they're going to see the returns so significantly.
Yeah.
And quickly.
So then when Curtis is like, hey, this is a thing that we need to start supplementing in, do you recall there being any pushback at all from your parents, from other kids that you were playing with, being like, dude, you don't have to do that stuff yet? Was there any of that involved, or was it kind of hey, we trust this guy, he says this is important, so we should do it?
Definitely from my parents, the trust was there with Curtis. I know the prevailing logic at the time of going around would be you're going to stunt your growth if you lift too much.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's still some of that today. I'm not a part of too many circles where that would get stated. But and training is different for a 10-year-old than it is for a 20-year-old. I think maybe that's where that false dichotomy starts getting brought up, is they're picturing we're not having 10-year-olds do Tom Platt's leg days, right? That's not what their training looks like. That's not what their lifting looks like.
That's a great Google search for people out there. Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be training. It just means that their training needs to be different and according to their age.
Yeah.
And the fear influencing the decision making is valid. If that's something you've heard as a parent, you want what's best for your kid. You've heard all over the place that this is going to stunt their growth. Seems reasonable in the head that subjecting them to that kind of pressure and intensity could do that, but that's just not the actual truth. That's not where we're at today. And it's actually going to just set them back from a motor learning perspective, from a physical development perspective, and lose out on the chance to build a huge foundation for what's going to matter a ton when they get into high school sports.
Yeah.
For you as a 13, 14-year-old, how quickly did you buy into the lifting piece? Was it immediate? Did it take some time for you to understand how it was going to translate skill wise? Was there any kind of barrier to you wanting to lift outside of your friends and parents and whatnot?
Not too much, because I think for me, I've always been really drawn to one of the reasons I love baseball is the quantification and the progress, getting incrementally better at something. And the weight room is such a sick spot for liking those things.
Yeah.
the numbers that I'm writing in on my sheets for my lifts are going up.
Yeah.
And I'm swinging the bat faster. Like, I can see the number on the scale going up. Like, I get this like gamified response where I'm told, hey, these numbers are important. I work on these certain things and I get to see those numbers go up.
Yeah. It's funny. Like I'm pretty convicted that like the reason that some of our young high school kids are presenting the way that they are, and we've got an interesting example of like, I think the whole of that's not even necessarily so baseball specific in the form of Brady Bonnell. Like, I'm pretty sure that we're starting to see that worm turn specifically because of what we're doing during that 13-14 year. Like, I'm convicted. And, we've talked about this before, but like, I mean, well, we got the expert here. Like, tell me if this makes sense. I think the toughest thing to navigate about select baseball is the schedule. Like that's where it goes wrong most of the times. And you're either over-indexing on games, you're simultaneously under-indexing on practice, and you're also like fundamentally neglecting like the athletic engine underneath. And all of it just kind of comes back to the same thing, which is we're playing too many games. And because of that, it either inhibits our ability to do those other things, or if we do, we're just going to see incredibly like minimal or even no return on that investment because the kid is just fatigued, right? So since we've started, I think the luxury that we have in the Northwest, and I don't know if you kind of experience that same thing when you start doing stuff with Curtis, is that middle school baseball generally isn't a big thing here. So because of that, what we've done since we started is our 13-14 teams basically train all year and will kind of intermittently play games throughout that training. Like that's the way that it works. What we wanted to do is play like, I mean, I think the first year that we did it, we did like one tournament a month-ish. Maybe.
That's still kind of what we do. We're in a league also to get game plan, but it's one tournament a month for those kids, and the rest of the time they're here, they're lifting because we still want them to lift at least twice a week.
And that's the thing, right? Is that like we're trying to crush 2 to 3 lifts a week. We're trying to stay consistent, and we want to stay progressing in that whole thing. So that's what we do for basically those 24 months from 13 to 14 to 14 to 15, we hit that program. And now what we're seeing is that these kids are going into high school and they just present differently than some of their peers in some pretty stark ways, and we can see that also when we bring kids in for assessments. And we'll assess kids that come in that aren't on our teams, and they come in as like a 14 or a 15, and we'll compare their numbers in some of our force plate tests against the kids on our teams, specifically the ones who have been through us or with us through that 24-month sprint or maybe longer. And it's like, okay, the differences are pretty stark because the stuff works. Like it just does. Like it's not rocket science. We can quantify athletic development. We see that improvement, and there's a pretty clear map to how that affects the skill. It's not 1-to-1, right? It's not like going from 225 to 315 on a trap bar deadlift is going to increase your bat speed by 90 miles an hour. You don't get like 1 mile an hour per pound. It doesn't work that way. It'd be very nice if it did. It doesn't. But it's such like a holistic benefit in terms of just like the athletic composition too. And that's the thing that always, I have a hard time wrapping my head around why people are so reluctant to kind of have kids do age appropriate strength training, is because you got to move, and if you train the right way, you're getting strong in the positions that you're going to be moving. So how's that a bad thing?
Yeah. I mean, this is probably not quite the pod for that, but I think that mostly has to do with the sliders that coaches play with in a practice environment and what access they have to certain things. And like if you don't have access to a weight room or like someone who can program your athletes in that weight room, I don't not understand not really programming for athletic development and spending a lot more of your time and energy on skill development if you just like don't have that expertise. Like I'm really lucky as a coach that I have strength trainers here that help me program my athletes and stuff like that. Cause otherwise like My athletes wouldn't get that. So I do understand to an extent why a lot of places don't spend that much time on athletic development. The thing I don't understand is why I don't think they would, even if they had the resources.
Yeah. And that's the crazy thing, because again, like, you get some new lifters, they get those beginner gains, and like, you're going to see it resolve itself pretty quickly.
Yeah. My favorite, which happens all the time, especially once we start going outside, is when I hear from kids that like, that was easier than it used to be. Or I actually didn't think I could do that. It's like, yeah, you don't see the gains because they're incremental and you're here lifting 3 times a week. But then you go 3 months and then you get back on a field. You're different than you were 3 months ago, and you can do stuff that you couldn't do 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And like, it may not feel like that on a Friday to a Monday in the gym, but it does feel like that on a Sunday 3 months apart.
Yeah.
When you're like, oh, like, that's why I lift, is because like I'm doing the same thing as I was on a baseball field before, and now the ball's going 40 feet farther because I'm a lot stronger.
Yeah. So if you started around 14-ish, if you could jump in a time machine and like parallel universe this thing, and you could start with yourself at 12, what do you think you would want that curriculum to look like? Because I'm pretty sure, I'm kind of teeing you up here, right? I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't be get straight under a barbell, but I think a lot of people in that kind of pre-barbell world are not really clear about what that curriculum should look like. It feels a little bit nebulous, right? Do I just have my kid do push-ups? Are kettlebells appropriate? Is it a P90X type of situation? Like nobody really knows.
I think there's just a giant lack of strength and conditioning understanding just in general.
Yeah. And even more so at like that weird stage.
Yeah. But I am curious, and then my follow-up on that is going even younger too.
That's
10,
what I was going to say.
like those ages.
Start even younger, and when we think about that young, like we can start as early as like 6 is where like the most famous LTAD model starts.
Yeah.
Is fundamentals, like capital FUN.
Yeah.
And that period is about building like fundamentals of sport, like learning the rules, learning the important movements, swinging a bat fast, throwing the ball, having fun, being challenged like physically and technically in ways that are fun and enjoyable enough for the athletes to sustain and like find out which sports they love, which they don't, and begin to learn those fundamental movement patterns, because that's all you're going to accomplish.
Right.
And you're not going to see hypertrophy in an 8-year-old, right? Like they don't have the requisites to support that.
Coach Whitey, hypertrophy meaning
building muscle.
Right.
Like
right.
An 8-year-old on a strict high volume gym regimen, weighing themselves and eating in a caloric surplus, eating more than they're burning, isn't going to start just like packing on lean muscle mass.
They just can't.
Yeah.
Right. Like they literally can't. They don't have the hormones to supplement that process happening. They can't participate in hypertrophy. It doesn't matter how much you have them lift or how frequently. They just can't.
And the good thing is I don't think that's like a huge crowd out there trying to do that.
Yeah.
But what you can do at that time is like, it would be considered like golden age for motor learning.
Yep.
Like before they get to that peak height velocity, which is fancy way of saying your growth spurt, the fastest rate of change in height, peak height velocity, is like when that puberty is really starting to get going. And up till then, like that's time to focus on the motor learning. So learning the fundamentals of the sport, broadly, specifically, and then that's where like learning how to squat, roll, control your body through space, like those kind of things. And so in practice, that should look like relay races, physical challenges, playing other sports, like challenging the athletes in
gymnastics.
Exactly, like hard to beat.
A lot of gymnastics,
that, right? And so say if I was to go back to like 9 or 10, like I played a lot of sports, like definitely would have done that, like. And participating in like more of those kind of challenges, like flag football, basketball, things like that to the max, like have fun, like to pick the ones that I would have liked the most. And then as that starts to transition to 10 to 12, that starts to learning what patterns you're learning should shift a little bit and start to be like, what are we setting up next? And what's coming next is going to be that 12 to 14 window where you're hitting your growth spurt, you're close to hitting your growth spurt in there, where it's time to start transitioning a little bit into the weight room. So to set that up, that's a good time to start with like body weight movements and learning these patterns, not because like doing some body weight squats or lunges or incorporating those into those physical challenges is going to like directly translate to like more bat speed or something like that at the time.
Yeah.
But because learning them now is something that you can accomplish, that's going to pay dividends a year or two later.
Yeah.
Because that way, when you're in that peak height and peak weight velocity time, your growth spurt, and your body's ready to start gaining strength and power, you're not wasting the first 3 to 4 months of that really great window learning how to do a squat.
And I understand that it's a little bit like amorphous for parents and coaches to kind of like, they think about these type of exercises, right? Like gymnastics type of exercises, or the type of exercises and movements you might learn playing soccer, playing basketball, playing flag football, etc. They think about that as like a very different thing than the stuff that you express on a baseball field. But then when those kids are deprived of that type of stimulus, you watch the routes that like a kid who's been deprived of that take on a ground ball, or you watch the routes that they have on a fly ball. You watch the route that they have when they're like trying to round the bases. Like movement competency is really real. And I'm pretty convicted that like when it's little kids, like in that 8 to under window or even 6 to under window, a lot of what they express is just reflective of the stimulus that they've received. But when you have select baseball creeping lower and lower and lower and lower in 5U, 6U tournaments, and those kids are doing a lot of baseball, I think the fact of the matter is just like if you play our sport a lot, there's a lot of those movement skills you're just never going to learn because the sport doesn't afford you this like open space, perceptual, moving, cutting, falling, landing thing that flag football or soccer is going to teach, right? It's not going to be maybe as kinetic in terms of like jumping and sprinting as basketball, but you still need that stuff, right? So like the tricky thing is I think year-round baseball gets demonized for a good reason, but that presumes that year-round baseball can only look one way, and that it's constantly going to be deficient of this type of stimulus. And the thing that we're trying to do with our teams on the younger side is like, well, what if it isn't? What if it isn't? What if year-round baseball doesn't mean that you're playing games year-round, right? What if year-round baseball means that you, through this container of baseball, are exposed to some of this other stimulus that you might not otherwise get? Or we could also just do year-round baseball, but have a portion of that year dedicated to like giving you the freedom to go play another sport. Like we can do all of those things and expect that movement competency is going to be developed with it, and also that it won't be if we don't.
Absolutely. I mean, you can think of it really simply as like a Venn diagram of like the physical and the technical. Something like rolling, landing, things like that. That's not the technical side of baseball.
Yep.
Like you're not going to see that during the swing or delivery on the mound. But in the intersection of those two is the force production or the acceptance of force, maybe the elastic ability, that middle ground that if you only train the delivery or the swing or this really specific things, you're training some of that sliver, but you're leaving a lot of that out. And so it doesn't mean that like a vertical jump is, like you said with a deadlift, a direct translation. Like you jump 2 centimeters higher, you throw 2 miles an hour harder. But the property, there's some properties that influence both. And if we train them in isolation, we can separate that from the skill. It doesn't mean we're not training the skill. It just means that we're periodizing the balance between the two to maximize over a 2, 4, 6, 8 year period rather than get ready for the tournament this weekend.
Yeah. Okay, so take me back to high school, Whitey. How does the lifting program change as like a freshman, sophomore going to like junior, senior? Like, is it getting more technical? Are you sticking with the basics and just trying to add capacity? Like, what does it look like?
Getting more technical for sure. And a lot of that comes down to like training experience. So like for me, started training younger. So when I'm 15, 16, 17, I have years of training under my belt. So it can look a little bit more complex, more unilateral work. You can add things in like bands. But that's where like the two things, like you have your age and your training age. Like if you're a 17-year-old who hasn't lifted before, is older than a 15-year-old with 2 years of training experience, but what they're going to do in the weight room might end up looking pretty similar, right? And that's where like starting younger is a huge advantage to build the bottom of that pyramid, because that's where you have to start. So for someone like myself who started younger, they can start getting into things that are going to support the specific a little bit closer, like as we're moving up the pyramid. But the weight room is still going to be incredibly general, because we're going to do a lot of work on the specific as well. It's just not going to happen in a squat rack or with a dumbbell in my hand. It's going to happen now with a plyo ball, or then it was playing a lot of long toss, hitting, and seeing how far I can throw a baseball, seeing how far I can hit a baseball, how fast can I swing a bat. Those were what I was doing at the time. And the weight room is the steps below that on the pyramid.
So for the 12 and under version, if we have our time machine in the parallel universe, Connor White, we've got that kid playing other sports, playing. I mean, again, we just call it like LTAD curriculum, but I think, what we really mean here is largely just games that revolve around cultivating these type of movement capacities. Does that make, am I
jumping,
well enough?
Rolling, cutting, sprinting, landing, all challenging the body through 3 dimensions, and in ways that are varied and progressible. Like we can add elements of intensity, we can add elements of complexity, ways like that. And that could be as simple as a flag football game.
Right.
Do you find, and this is, I am fairly certain, going to be highly anecdotal because I don't know that we have a lot of evidence for this, but that athletes who have that foundation actually pick up skill side gains faster than athletes who don't?
I actually anecdotally had been thinking about that, because having played college baseball, almost everybody in a college baseball team can very quickly identify who on the pitching staff has been a PO for a very long time.
Yeah.
And
what do they look like?
Right?
Right.
Usually those are the guys that are still lankier.
Right.
And also, like, when they have to do a PFP or something that's outside of the thing that they're very specific at, the specific skill that they've been working at for a long time, they look so much worse than the guy who at least played shortstop through high school, or played third base through high school.
It's the reason why they yell pitchers are athletes too when they make a play, because they want.
Exactly. And those two guys' ability to throw a fastball over the plate or a slider over the plate might be similar, but the periphery, all the other things, if you take that athlete outside of his or her immediate like wheelhouse, the one who's only practiced the wheelhouse is gonna not have the same results.
Yeah.
And they're going to need more of that to improve, because they've probably tapped out a lot of the skill gains. Like, if the guy who's been a starting pitcher since his freshman year of high school, he has tapped out the benefits of having a routine, structuring his throwing around his starts. The guy who's a shortstop converting, that's at the same ability already, now he gets a throwing routine. Now his long toss gets built around his pitching outings. Yeah. That guy's going to see a boost up that guy who's been doing this for 6 years already has tapped out when he was a junior in high school.
Yeah.
We get a decent amount of anecdotal evidence of that, because we've got a lot of kids who are like 12 or 13. This is the first select ball experience they have, right? So some of them all over the Little League stuff, and this is just the first time they've played select. Some of them is like, we played a little bit of rec ball, but like he's getting more serious now that he's 13. And like one kid that I think about a lot had like barely played organized baseball, like very small amount of work, like just like the park district stuff, but had been a gymnast for years. Yeah. And that kid was the biggest gainer at that age group. Massive, like worst player baseball wise on the team when they started the year. By the end of the year, he's like one of the MVPs. Whereas a kid who's in a similar situation but didn't have that kind of like LTAD foundation, picked up similar gains on the skill side, but just like isn't that much better at baseball. Like the gains he got were not even close to the gains the other kid got, because he had this foundation of athletic movements that just like were massively helpful to him. And like we see that pretty frequently with like the kids that are sport specific since they were, 8, 9, 10, and then coming to us having never lifted or done anything athletic. They are much different trainees than the kid who like oh, I've played a bunch of sports or I've done XYZ and now I'm starting to get more serious about baseball when they're 13. Just like very different trainees. And like that I imagine is just like true all the way up the board.
Absolutely. And it's going to get like, that's where if you took somebody who hadn't played baseball and they were 19 and trying to learn, it'd be pretty ugly. Like even if they're a tremendous athlete.
Oh yeah.
But that's where this period that we're talking about, that 10 to 12, and then depending on when they're hitting that, like start of puberty, that window, like I talked about the motor learning, like in there, that's why we want to prioritize those motor learning things, because having that athletic and not just like the specifics, but the general there, like you're talking about, like that part of the Venn diagram, that kid has massive.
Yeah.
And that's just going to create more and more overlap and also it's just going to support everything that he does on the technical side. He has that much more speed, force, elasticity going into it as he can make those specific changes as he gets comfortable with his body as he grows.
So if you're given two athletes going into their senior year of high school, one of whom he been playing tournament ball since he was 6U, so you're like 12 years of like competitive travel baseball, and one of whom who played a little bit of baseball, played in high school, was JV and is now like was a varsity bench player or a JV starter and now is like looking at his senior year. Both these guys want to play college baseball. Who are you giving if they're both like fully going to commit to training for the year? Who in theory has the better shot? Who are you putting your money on? The kid who's got like the skill specific training for the last decade or the kid who's got like the LTAD training for the last decade?
I think that's tough. I would say because like knowing like here, we know how to train both of those guys.
Yeah.
Because like both of those guys, we should be able to get them to play college baseball.
Right.
The avenue that they're going to get there is going to be totally different. Right.
It's like two very divergent paths.
And if I would rather maybe answer the question of like who's going to see bigger gains on the skill side, because then it's going to be the kid with the athletic base, but it's about giving them what they need, because that kid has the athletic base, doesn't have the specific. We're going to train the specific. We're still going to train the general to an extent that he can support it, right? Because it's especially for a high schooler, like you're not getting like massive CNS fatigue when you're 16. Like you're not really like good enough at anything to produce the outputs for that. So like the training economy is pretty big. And so like you can get dog tired from hitting, throwing, and still go get a lot out of the weight room over the course of the week. So that athlete's still going to train on the physical side, but they're going to get so much more return out of the skill side. Whereas the athlete that's mostly tapped out, what they're going to get on the specific side, their training economy should just be shoved into the physical. Because we can see in our database that has countless high school and college athletes, there is a very clear difference between the two. Body weight, max strength, and explosive strength, it's close to a 20 to 25% gap between the two. And that's a bigger gap than it is between college and pro. There's still a pretty big gap there. But the physicality is just a clear separator. Like it's a requisite. It doesn't mean that like jumping higher, weighing more is going to make you a college baseball player, but you have to be physical enough to do so. And so both sides need to be trained. Both athletes can get there if they train the right way. But if the athlete that's good at the general keeps training the general, he's not going to get good enough at the specific. And if the athlete that's already good at the specific stays on that path, he might be good enough to play college baseball, but he's going to be that PO or whatever that we were just talking about that has plateaued already. And if you're plateauing in your skill or your results at 16, you better be like really good. Like there are guys that are good enough at baseball to do that for sure. They get drafted every year. But the likelihood of being there, and if you're that guy, you know you're that guy already because scouts are talking to you. And if you're not that guy, time to get to work.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people all the time that like, you know, the point of starting our assessment with force plates and HP is about at the highest level. It's about you getting data to make that type of decision, right? Do you need physical development? Do you need skill development? Do you need some combination of both? And what I tell people is just like, you know, we do that same system with the younger kids. But at this point, I still haven't seen like a 12 or a 13-year-old that's been like, oh, we just need to put all of our time on the skill side because the physical box is checked. Like, we have the spider graph. I can see their athlete score. It's like a 1. And that's okay. Like that's okay. That's where they are right now. But it's one of those weird things. I think that's like a downstream effect of the hyper professionalization of youth sports that's happened in the last like decade or two. Is we want to throw all this like sophisticated technical stuff at kids, and there's this presumption that like, well, if there's this modality of training that's appropriate for pros or collegiate athletes, then like that's definitely applicable for my high schooler, and it's for sure applicable for the pre-teen kind of underbelly of amateur baseball. But if it's aimed at this collegiate or professional player that's predicated on them having a base of physical preparation that your 11, 12, 10, 7-year-old child simply doesn't have, then like square a whole round peg, man. These things aren't the same thing. And to your point, is the kid going to get worse by that stuff? They might not necessarily get worse, but it's an opportunity cost thing.
That's what I was going to say.
It's an opportunity cost because by choosing this hyper specific thing, that and I'm trying to, I try to be understanding of the fact that like if you choose the hyper specific thing, you're looking for like this really definitive output. And because nobody has access at scale to force plates, right? You have to come to a place like us to get that type of testing done. The improvement that you might see to that athleticism as measured in a 6 or a 12 or an 18-week stretch is a little bit hard to define. But it still doesn't change the basic math that like the opportunity cost of choosing the highly specific and the highly technical, it comes at the expense of the time you put into general physical preparation.
For sure. And also a good time to plug the new jump feature that now we can.
See, you see where I'm going with this. You see where I'm going with this.
In your pocket. And
just laying some breadcrumbs.
Yeah, right. What you talked about with the assessment is huge because like, and we do that explicitly, right? From our force play model, we take the expected bat speed or the expected pitch speed, where we have thousands and thousands of tests through, and using those, we built these regressions that tell us, assuming average skill, how fast would we expect this athlete to throw the ball or swing the bat,
right,
based on just their physical metrics, just their physicality. So that gives us the physical component, and then we can see in the motion capture lab how fast do they actually do that thing. And then the gap between us tells us it's like a skill differential. Like if they swing the bat 65 and their expected bat speed is 59, it's going to be like a +6 would be the delta there, right? So this athlete's skill is 6 miles an hour ahead of their physical. That athlete should spend more time focusing on the physical, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And it's very explicit that way, really easy to see. And now with the jump feature, we can do that in retests for athletes wherever they are. Like I've seen videos come through of guys like on the sidewalk outside their house going, and pretty sweet. It's obviously not going to be like as good as the force plates, but it's going to beat most jump mats.
Yep.
And it's going to give us more of that like longitudinal data on the athletes, which is, when you're that young, the most important thing, right? Like the most important thing isn't how high can you jump, it's the improvement over time of these metrics.
Yeah, it's the path. The path. So to be really clear, what we're talking about is a new feature that's available in the Driveline training app that you get to use if you are training with Driveline. Whether that's something like packages like online pitching, online hitting, Flex. Flex is one of those things that like you can take advantage of that ability to both test and retest athletic performance now. And it is it's an application and a sticker away from you being able to do that at your house, on the street, in your backyard, whatever. Like it's a thing that we can do. You want to talk about how it works?
Yeah, and even before that, I'll talk about like why jump testing.
Yes.
And the reason we use jump testing as our means of testing like explosive strength and like our main base of those expected regressions is because it's really simple. Like every component, like I mentioned earlier, has a physical and a technical components to it. So when we're testing a physical property, we want to strip away as much of that technique as possible.
So the thing to kind of understand here is that like jumping is a skill, but it's an incredibly low level skill, right? And it's a skill that most people possess. So we want to lean in this world where we're trying to test athleticism. we don't want that to be gated behind some sort of like skill that person might just not have yet, right? We can kind of make the presumption that a jump is a skill that most people can do. And then from that, we can get insight into all this performance stuff.
Yep. And that's where like the force plates are a huge addition, obviously, because then no matter, even if you're really bad at the technique of a jump, which is again a pretty simple task, but there are still levels to that.
Sure.
We can read the actual force that's coming out of the ground. And that's the data and the models that went into building this new tool, the jump feature, which uses sticker, looks like a QR code. It's called a RUCO code. We take the jump video and process it using computer vision. It's basically tracking that marker that's set on center of mass to see in like real time the displacement of the athlete.
Yep. And
that's important because, like we said, we want to identify, like, strictly try to really focus in on that pure physical output. Because like if we were talking about strength testing, if we were to do say like a 1 rep max on a back squat,
yeah,
couple reasons why we wouldn't want to do that with a young athlete. One is going to be the technical component. How good is that athlete at back squatting?
Mm-hmm.
Most likely not very good. So what we're going to find out, we're going to get a low number, but we're not going to be sure how much of that is because they're weak, how much of that is because they're bad at squatting.
Right.
We take a lot of that out with the jump. The second component is going to be the safety of that. If they're not very good at squatting and they're trying to achieve high weights, that's a recipe for potential injury, or at least popping up and hurting a training week.
Yep.
Which is why in gym, when we do the strength testing, we use an isometric mid-thigh pull. So what that looks like, for those that aren't familiar, it's going to be your setup, leverage position, basically looks like the top of a deadlift. The bar is fixed. You're standing on the force plates. You have straps for your forearms, so there's no heavy grip stress involved. Squeeze the bar, straps are there, and then you drive your legs into the ground.
Yeah.
It's about as leveraged of a position as we can put a human in, because we're, same as with the jumps, we're trying to get as close to that max force production as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we're stripping away a lot of the technique, almost all of it. And also the bar's not moving, the athlete's not moving.
Yep.
We're cranking that injury risk down significantly. And isometric testing has been shown, that's been proved out, that it's going to be safer, and we're going to get more reliable data. It's going to help us compare between athletes, because we're not trying to compare the force production via squat of athletes that squat differently. We know that these two athletes produced how much force, and we know that they were in the exact same position because we're measuring joint angles and setting that bar height.
And I think the interesting thing to really be like 1,000% clear on is you can test that stuff in the gym on our force plates, and we can get really, really high level insight. You can test it online using a sticker and the app, and we can map that stuff to what we get in the gym and be able to track that longitudinal progress over as long as we need to. And it doesn't have to be predicated on, oh, well, hey, I gotta go to the Tampa location, right? I gotta go to Scottsdale. I gotta go to Kent. Like, you can, but we're now just kind of like breaking the proverbial fourth wall, allowing this type of testing to take place outside of our gym, which pairs with everything else we can do on the skill side, right? I can't put a HitTrax in your house. I wish I could.
For a certain dollar amount.
I mean, yeah, HitTrax at home is a thing. Yeah. I've seen the number. I don't have one yet. Honey, one day. I don't have one yet, but if we had to miss a workout on Friday, right? We had a family thing on Friday. My son couldn't come down into the gym. He had his workout for the day in track, so he knew what he was going to do on the lifting side, knew what he had to do on the throwing side, and on the hitting side. Hey man, you got your blast sensor. You've got baseballs. We will hit them. We will see what bat speed was, right? Like, it's just fundamentally different than it was like 4 or 5 years ago, where like if you wanted to do the Driveline, you had to be here. Like you just had to be here. And it's not like blast sensors didn't exist 5 years ago, but our ability to model all of this stuff and figure out where you are on that progression, both on the skill side and on the athleticism side, is way better than it's ever been at any point in time. So if you're listening to all this and you're like, hey, I am invested in the emotion, in the athletic development of my child, and they want to be happy, and I want to make sure that they're safe, and I need some guidance to do that stuff, we have the things. Like, we have the things to be able to do this now. The one thing that I did want to make sure we get into is the IMTP and the predicted IMTP versus what we're getting, which has been interesting. because we don't have the IMTP, the isometric mid-thigh pull. We don't have kids like 15 and younger do that. So what our reports are able to do is basically like look at the jump test models and then make like a predictive guess about what the IMTP stuff should be. Am I sausaging that? Is that generally right?
It's in the similar way to how we constructed like the expected velocity, expected bat speed. So like expected IMTP, right? So it's using all the pair data we have. Athletes, every one of the thousands of athletes that have jumped and pulled, we're able to compare and see like which jump stats correlate to what IMTP stats.
And IMTP is measured in watts, right?
Newtons.
Or I'm sorry, newtons. My bad. So it's 1 Newton meter of force, right? Well, it's more than one, right? It's however many newtons you
God,
can pull.
I hope so.
Yeah, if we got some
Ideally.
ones that IMTP on babies, let's not do that. So I think one of the interesting thing that we saw with our first round of our HP, the high performance, again, that's where all this stuff happens for us at Driveline, is we saw the first round of testing. So we had a lot of kids who had been in the program for years, and we had a predicted IMTP score for them, but they never had a real one. But then they went in and like drastically outperformed their real one, which was like, oh, like that's interesting. So I'm curious, what do you think is happening there? Is it just a deficiency in the model, or are we really kind of like breaking the predictive scoring of the IMTP because we're getting better results than I think we would plan otherwise because of this attachment to like the HP and the LTAD curriculum? And I truly do not know the answer.
So I would say like the best guess would be like when we think about like the main inputs for the predicted or the expected IMTP, like body weight is a huge one.
Yes.
And then the explosive force from the jumps, the peak force from the jumps. Without having combed through all of the individual jump data, I would guess that the part that's really low for a lot of those athletes going into that is the body weight side of that input. And so what basically like their maximal strength is ahead of what we would expect for their body weight.
Yes.
Right.
And this makes sense with what we've talked about earlier with like what properties can we and should we train for young athletes. When we're going through that, like 13 to 15, that's when we're starting to transition from that. Like I mentioned, peak height velocity, peak weight velocity usually is like a little bit after that. Same thing. It's just like your growth spurt for filling out your frame. So like your fastest rate of gaining weight, that's going to be an indicator that like the body's ready to start putting on some strength and some muscle. So these athletes that are getting into that time, we're really focused on in that window. Like we talked about, building coordination, training the movement patterns. They're running, they're jumping, they're landing. They're doing things that are subjecting the body to force, but they're not building muscle mass in the same way that most of the athletes that are in our database, between like high school through professional athletes, they're doing the jumping, the landing, the running, but they're also building muscle mass. So these young athletes are kind of cranking one side of that equation and not the other because they're not ready to.
Right.
So they're kind of like they're maxing out their one side, the force and the ability to produce it on that side without relative to their muscle mass. So like pound for pound, they're stronger than you would expect.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting, right? Like I think I pulled 12 kids. And just from like our highest performing 12 to the lowest, first one, Colby Martin, pulled a 3,200 on the IMTP.
How old is he?
15.
That's sick.
But
so
it was,
for those at home, that's above the college average.
Right. Notably 481 newtons above his expected. And like that to me was like, okay, that's not a small gap.
Yeah.
You know, like that's not a small gap.
And his expected is going to be higher than a lot of kids his age because he is a larger kid than most
he is a
kids
big
his
15-year-old. But then the next one down, Noah Curry, right? Still pulled a 3K, 30-30, 683 newtons above expected. That just starts to get a little spooky, right? The next one, King Edwards, as a matter of fact. 2,800, which again, in King is a smaller kid on our 15s, right?
5'7", 135.
And he's one that like 794 above the expected. So to me, I think that just to what you were just saying is like he's almost 800 newtons above the expected because his strength relative to his size and mass is just like we're in a really good place.
Yep.
And that maps to like I think what is it in the on the reports, it's the strength to body weight.
Yeah, the relative strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the relative strength ratio, a 4.44 on him.
Yeah.
Like,
and so our average for college and pros is around like a 3.5.
Right.
So he's almost a full extension of body weight past that.
That's a pretty cool place to be.
Yeah.
Like that's just a pretty cool place to be because again, I think it's reasonable to expect that in the next 2 years, he's going to have some amount of like additional physical maturity, right? That is going to allow him to train more of the general and more of the specific. But if we can maintain like a 4, he could be not that big of a baseball player and be strong and powerful as all get out. We could be like in a really good place.
Definitely. And when we think about like what translates from the force plates the most to the field is explosive strength, like the ability to produce power, producing a lot of force really quickly. What do you have to do before you can produce a lot of force really quickly? You have to produce a lot of force. Yeah. So getting there, that's step one. And so if these guys are, especially relative to their own body weight, getting close to or already checking that box, that means that as they're progressing into high school baseball, we can focus more on the explosive side of that equation, which then translates the quickest and the cleanest to the skill.
Yeah. I mean, in the next 4 kids on this list, right? It's Colton, Danny, Lincoln, Nate. They're all pulling somewhere between a 2,700 and a 2,400, but all those numbers are like 240, 326, 232, 405 above their expected, and their strength to body weight 3.95, 3.92, 4.21, 3.7.
Yep.
Like, that's why we run the program the way we do.
Right.
It just is. And I'm just going to say it, man. I'm pretty convicted that all those kids should be playing college baseball. Like I'm pretty convicted that all of them should have a decent shot. And a lot of that is going to depend on how both performance and development opens up over the course of the next 2.5 years on the skill side. But like you made the point earlier, right? That like this stuff is just non-negotiable as you move up the chain in terms of the competition environment between high school and professional, or in collegiate and then professional.
Right.
You can't not check that box anymore. You just can't. And the fact that we are like, I don't want to say that like box checked, right? Because we still got a lot of work to do, but we're getting closer and closer and closer to that 18 months ahead of the curve, 24 months ahead of the curve, 30 months ahead of the curve. Like, it'll be interesting to see when this year's 15s, once they turn 16, once we have them IMTP, what those numbers look like, because I suspect it's going to be a continuation of the same trend. That we are in a really good place relative to the physical development. And again, this is all just a reflection of schedule. Like, it's just a reflection of schedule and choice.
Thinking about going the other direction, right? And focusing way more on skill side than on the athletic development side. There have been a lot of athletes who have assessed or done a snapshot recently with flex and stuff like that. And the assumption is if we're going to spend most of our time on the skill side, it's mostly going to be mechanics, right? Quote unquote mechanics, right? Yes. Like that's what we're putting a lot of our eggs into that basket. And then you see these biomech reports and they're not great.
Yeah.
And a decent amount of the issues are because they don't have the mobility and physical strength they need to get to certain positions.
Yeah.
And it's like, what am I supposed to do with your mechanic? Like, I can give you a million drills in the world, but like, if you are physically not able to get layback, that your drill is just like, be more mobile.
Yeah. I mean, what's the layback drill?
And there's a lot of these kids that we're seeing now that are coming in for these snapshots that have significant mechanical flaws that are really difficult to solve without just like, hey, be a better athlete. And like you need to be more mobile.
With that too, something that I could have mentioned earlier is when we're thinking about these periods where the body undergoes massive change, right? What do we think about with it's like the baby deer, right? The kid who shot up in height.
Yep.
Like their coordination is out the window.
Yep.
And if you're trying to get better at something really specific and challenging, like throwing a baseball, and you're stumbling around, you can't walk on a straight line because your femur has grown so much. Like your body is new to you every month, and you're trying to do a really specific task, and you're trying to improve these things. That's so difficult, and that's why part of why that period should really be dedicated to like improving those general athletic abilities, getting better at those, because your squat isn't going to change that much as you get older. Your delivery on the mound is going to change a lot from the age 12 to 18, but the general physical movement patterns stay pretty similar.
Right.
So we train those a lot because they're still going to be there. There's going to be residual after that horrible uncoordinated phase. But if we train and we get really good at the skill at 10 years old, it's a different body by the time they're 16 anyways, and they're going to have to relearn those things.
Right.
That doesn't mean we don't train the skill at all. It's just a matter of like, where are we allocating these sliders? Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So USA Baseball put something out this weekend about T-work, right?
I saw that.
Yeah. Let me just read you the quote. Balance is essential throughout the swing of balance is essential throughout the sequence of producing a quality swing. Coaches should check players' balance before they initiate the swing. If you can push the player off his stance, his or her stance, in any direction with minimal effort, the hitter is off balance. This lack of balance will be magnified during the swing due to its tremendous force. Off-balance swings will hinder eye contact with the ball. I don't disagree with any of the core contention there, right? However,
Other than pushing kids off balance when they're swinging.
however, to what degree is balance not necessarily a technical issue with the swing, but instead an expression of an athlete's inability to stabilize in a position and then during movement?
Yeah.
How do you chicken and egg that thing, right? But if the core contention you make is that like a kid takes a swing that's off balance, and I'm just going to have to like caveat this, then say that I saw a decent amount of swings that looked off balance play this weekend during like professional playoff baseball that still played on a field. So like, you know,
turns out 101 and then followed by like 87 can get you off balance a little bit.
Yeah. Like that'll happen. But it's inherently, I don't want to say that it's disingenuous, because I don't think it's disingenuous. I think it's just ill-informed that like the root issue here isn't necessarily the technical. The root issue may just be the physiological system you bring to the technical task. And if the conclusion that you make is like, we have to solve the technical task first, so then you're going to then go down that rabbit hole and chase one different swing modification, another different swing modification, keep the head still, stay balanced. And what you're dealing with is a systemic problem. You are never going to solve it. You're just never going to solve it. And to a degree, balance in the swing could be solved in a squat rack. You know, it could be solved doing something unilateral with kettlebells in your hand, right? It could be solved when you're 10, 11, 12, playing a game that is going to challenge you to balance and move. But we see it through this like really myopic baseball lens that like kid looks unbalanced in swing, therefore swing must be fixed. And it's like you're treating it like it's a separate thing when it's like actually linked to what they bring to the task.
When you get to a certain age and stage of development with an athlete, and like I've seen this with my athletes of like, yeah, if you get a 15-year-old who legitimately can't do a somersault,
yeah,
and you have them in your dynamic warm-up, their somersaults, it is embarrassing. Like if you can't do it and the rest of your team, like that's not a somersaults aren't like, we're not talking about like a handspring here or like a backflip.
Yeah.
Like that's a relatively simple movement that like was shocking how many athletes who are, I would consider relatively high level baseball players for 14 are totally incapable of doing a somersault.
It's a simple movement if you have any exposure with it of recent memory, right? And if you haven't done it, it gets increasingly technical in your ability to just like do it. Like, I remember the first time I went into like an MMA wrestling class, and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna do like somersaults in all that stuff in the warm up," and I was like, "Oh no, oh no, I haven't done one of these for." Well, let me think. Cora was just born. I was 27-ish. So let's just generously say at least 15 years. I just about like paralyzed myself driving my head into the ground.
What I think a thing that is definitely true and that we're relatively good at most of the time is hiding embarrassment, I guess. Like, it's way less embarrassing if you're a 10-year-old. Like, just life is way less embarrassing if you're a 10-year-old than if you're like a 15, 16-year-old with hormones. But like the earlier you don't, like a 15-year-old doesn't want to do something that's embarrassing. Yes. So like they don't want to try to do a somersault because you look like an idiot, man. Like, and you're going to look like an idiot in front of all your teammates.
Yeah. There's social sensitivity for that stuff.
Right. Whereas a 10-year-old, let me look like an idiot, bet. Right. Like, and they're going to do that thing more and more and look like an idiot. And the earlier you can introduce that, I feel like the easier it is to get around the ego part of like, I can't physically do that. So trying to physically do that is going to hurt my ego. So like I'm too late to even like really try to physically do that thing. Which I think dovetails with the thing that I think we do really well here is like, I can say this personally for myself on a baseball podcast that a lot of people listen to. I was afraid of the weight room most of my life, right? Like I was a late bloomer. I was a smaller kid. Like the weight room to me was like a lot of grunting, a lot of deadlifting, a lot of Olympic lifting, and like dudes that were way stronger than me. And I felt like I had no place in the weight room. Yeah. And like, I do feel like that is a lot of kids just feel that, right? Like, especially if you're a high school kid, like weight rooms are for football players.
Yeah. I mean,
in a lot of cases,
I've seen it with like our 14s, like the ones that have been with us for a while are starting to transition under a barbell.
Right.
And then new kids that come in and they're doing external load or body weight stuff, and they're looking at their teammates and like that kid's putting a 45 on the end.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, you know, the social stigma there is real, but like to your point,
and on day one we're talking them through all the safety stuff, and like what could go wrong, right? Which is just like adding another layer to the scarification of it. But like, I feel like we do a really good job introducing them to the weight room young, in a way that is conducive to them building a long-term relationship with that weight room. Yeah. Not just with their athletic development, but with that weight room where like it's a place they enjoy being. Yeah. And it's not a place that's like a place of embarrassment, a place of fear, shame, anything like that. And I feel like way too often that is what it turns into really quickly if you don't do it the right way. Yeah. In a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even really talked about that, but just like the benefits of being physically active and specifically strength training over the course of your entire life are just like very, very real, like very real. And the closer I get to death's doorstep, the more intimate that stuff is for me.
Almost impossible to overrate.
Yeah. I didn't get comfortable with a weight room until I was working in professional baseball and had like a strength coach be like, "Hey, you want to come live with me?" And I like kind of laughed at him and was like, "No." And he was like, no, okay, now you have to come. Like, we're going to get this fear out of the weight room, out of your body. And like, I'll walk you through everything. There's no embarrassment here. And like, I was 23 when I like actually first did things in the weight room, not like, picked up, a dumbbell here and there, but like actually did program lifts for the first time in my life. I was 23. It's like, I feel like most people probably never even get there. Yeah. And we don't do a good enough job adapting it to younger ages and removing that like fear or that social pressure around the weight room that just exists at those ages.
Yeah. I mean, the programming is incredibly important. Like me and my buddy E used to go down to IMA at UW and just move some dumbbells and some
pick up heavy things and put them down. Yeah.
And like, I don't think my bench went up. I don't think my deadlift went up at all, because we were just, we were in college. We had no idea what we were doing.
Right.
It was like, I think the first time I pulled up like a Dorian Yates workout, and I was just like, oh no, there's like a more intentional way you're supposed to do this thing. And then I found like strong list 5x5, and it was like, like you can actually just like put stuff into the app, and and now we have the ability to like get really specific and really individual with it. Instead of like a strong lift, which is kind of like choose your own adventure. Like, do you want to start at 135? Do you want to start at 405? What do you want to do? It's not necessarily that.
Do you find a lot of athletes that you work with at a higher level, college, pro, have that experience, that background of like fear of the weight room?
I don't know if I'd say a lot. There's definitely some, and usually those are guys that are so good at the specific. Like those are going to be guys that are usually the guys that get referenced when people try to talk about the force production not being important. Like those handful of guys that you think off the top of your head.
Yeah.
But it usually turns out that when you test those guys, like they are still really good at physical things. It's just like in a different way. Like they might be like really elastic athletes, really reactive athletes, but their ability to translate force quickly is still usually at like a really, really high percentile. But yeah, those are usually the athletes where like, they're like, I don't know, I gained 10 pounds quickly in college and I threw slower or something like that. And they like, that is like a statement I've heard from an MLB pitcher. That's really good. And he's right. Like he did do that. He's not wrong. Like in his experience, like he tried the thing that he was told to do of like put on more mass, and it went horribly. But that's where like the doing things the right way at the right time comes into play. And for somebody like that, it's the sports car, right? Where there's so much output regardless of the skill of the task, because they're such extreme athletes, that the risk inherent in any task is higher, because they're going to coordinate, they're going to have the output so high that, like I mentioned earlier with like those high school kids, like they don't have the neural capacity to like see that fatigue. It's the opposite for these guys, right? Like they got that down. So though that task, like if he went to go bulk up, his actual systems that he relies upon weren't getting trained for a long time. And it could have been like getting him away from the things that made him great.
Yeah. So if I'm the parent of a high school age kid, and let's say it's an underclass or even a middle school age kid, if I want to get started, I've established some foundational movement patterns in my like 6 through 12, 13 curriculum, right? Is there anything wrong with starting with just like a very simple squat, bench, dead, right? Like, is that meat and potatoes enough? Is there something even more basic that like those beginning lifters you think should be focusing on?
I would throw like row and sprint in there too, but otherwise like the exercise selection matters a lot less than the coaching, the progression, all of that. Like I think like really important in that is like have a qualified professional, whether that's like outsourcing it online or personal trainer at your local YMCA. Like at least like as long as like you vet this person, they know what they're talking about, they're qualified, because like the specific exercises, whether it's a goblet squat or zombie or whatever we're doing, like the individual exercise selection matters less than how it's applied, right? Like and so making sure that you're getting that application in the right spot is huge. And then also, like I said, sprint, throw, jump, and start to progress in those things, because like the big three is the big three for a reason, and that's like these are some of the heaviest ways that we can load the body. These compound movements are relatively simple and we can load them a lot. So like that is a great place to start in terms of like getting strong. But like I said, like the application of like what variations of those should I be doing? How should I progress these things over time? Like those are really good questions, and they should be answered by like somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you said, just to like double down on this, is like the specific exercise selection matters less than consistency and progression.
Yep.
Just listen to that at least
Underline,
2, if not 3 or 4 times.
Yes. Bold.
Yep.
And I know that there's a lot of there's a lot of consternation about sets and reps, right? For these beginning lifters, do you have a general guideline of like number of sets, number of working sets, rep range you want them to stay in, rep ranges you think would be like idiotic, rep ranges that you think are like borderline criminal? Like, what are those gradations of how we should think about wanting to see something being programmed?
Sure. So I think like it's about tailoring the exercise to the task. Like, what are you looking to achieve? If we're looking to build, if we're at a point where we're building strength or power, 3 to 5 sets, 3 to 5 reps is a really good rule of thumb. If we're thinking about like hypertrophy or building muscle mass, that like 6 to 12 rep window for reps per set, and then like 3 or 4 sets. But a lot of that comes down to like the intensity.
Yes.
So if an athlete is like lower in their training age, they're going to have trouble getting the intensity, like truly pushing close to failure in say like a 6 rep set. So like that athlete should do more reps per set, because that's going to get them, they're going to have like better margins on getting closer to failure. Like if I'm doing say a 20 rep set and it's 3 reps in reserve or something like that, so I got like 3 in the tank, that's going to be like pretty close to getting to failure, right? If we like apply that as a percentage. Versus if I'm that same athlete, like not great awareness of what failure feels like because I'm 14, to a 6 rep set. If you're 3 reps in reserve on a 6 rep set, like you're not very close to failure, right? Like that's another 50% passed. So like for the less experienced athletes, those higher rep ranges can be better. And really back to what I said at the beginning about like tailoring the exercise to what you're looking to get out of it. If we're looking to build something like anaerobic capacity, endurance, that's where like we really like using things like the sleds, where we're not going to do sets of like 50 like squats, at least very often. Because we'd rather push that to an implement where the fatigue is going to be like more concentrated. Like for the squat, like we've talked about a lot, there's skill component. There's the degree to which like that athlete doesn't feel like holding that dumbbell anymore. It's getting hard. It's getting heavy. The rate of decline there could be faster than the rate of like the actual like systems that we want to tax during that, the anaerobic systems, versus like something we simplify and go to like something like the sled. It's really simple, so that curve gets stretched out longer, so we can be sure that what we're trying to tax is actually like the limiting factor. Because if the limiting factor on a 13-year-old doing a goblet squat probably isn't going to be like how strong his legs are. Right. Versus if we can load up that sled and more reliably trust that like the limiting factor there is indeed like the properties that we're trying to train.
Recovery. What's the smart way to think about it? What's the dumb way to execute it? Because I think we've seen everything. And I think that the tricky thing is that like you could be someone who listens to this entire thing and you shut it off right now and you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to be lifting 6 days a week. Let's go. To me, that all of a sudden, just when you start talking about high school, especially young high school players, it's like you're for sure screwing up your recovery, and that recovery is actually going to like screw up your ability to progress. Is there anything else that's like technical that you would want people to understand about like how to manage recovery in a smart way to maximize gains? Like what's the guidelines for how you would approach it?
For sure. Where I would start with that is like understanding like how do changes in the body happen. And that's like we talk about like stress, recovery, adaptation. So like the stressor takes your body below baseline. Like the day after you lift really heavy, you would not be able to lift as heavy as the day before.
Correct.
Right? You are gassed. Then a few days later, you're back to baseline. You've recovered 48 hours later, probably. You're recovered. You could probably lift about what you did before. And if we stack enough of those on, we're going to get what's called the supercompensation effect, where our body goes above baseline. And the problem, if we're not respecting our recovery times, is we're going down, and then our body's always just going to be fighting to get back to baseline. Because if we're still below baseline and we train again and again and again, we're going to get to a state of like chronic fatigue. We're turning the acute fatigue that we want, that stress is good. Like stress can have the connotation of being bad, but that stress is important in this mechanism. But if we're stacking stress on stress on stress, then all we can do is just get back to baseline. We're fighting for like survival at that point. Versus when we stack these things, when we periodize them, we're getting that that natural up and down throughout our weeks, throughout our months, throughout a year. And that's how like changes in the body happens. So when we think about that, like if I lift on a Monday and I throw on a Monday and I'm still really sore on Wednesday, that's not a day that I should then like do the same intense thing that I did on Monday. Even if like that's what I have scheduled, it doesn't mean that I don't do anything that day. It means that my training should be around like where my physical capacity is. So maybe instead of, if I had another velo day scheduled for some reason, maybe I do long toss or a hybrid B or something like that, where I'm still training the systems that aren't fatigued, because I can work on my mechanics. I can accumulate volume, but my top end output's going to be shot anyways. So there's no reason to push that, because one, I'm not going to get anything out of it, and two, I'm going to go back and kill those gains that I would have had from Monday. So the recovery really starts with understanding like that relationship, the relationship between stress and the recovery. And I always appreciate like when you're having like pull a kid back from wanting to do too much. Because like I think that instinct is where like a lot of high performers start, is wanting like, what can I do? And understanding like they want to get better. And I really appreciate that. Like, that's great. And the understanding of like what you need to do is like, you need to recover as well as you train. Like that is part of your training, is the recovery, and weaving those things together because a sport like baseball, especially, things happen very quickly with tremendous amount of force, and then they don't happen for a while. You don't take 100 swings in a row. You get one or two probably per at bat, and then you go to the field, you go to the bench, whatever, and it's all about maximizing those individual collisions, instances, whatever you want to call it. So training the intensity is really important, and if we want to train intensely, we can't do that every day. And so that's why like our most common structure like would be like Monday, Wednesday, Friday are your higher intensity days. Typically one or two of those is going to be like hybrid A to velocity work, like above an RPE 8 or above 80% effort, with like a moderate day thrown in there somewhere in between, and then those recovery days in between. And what that looks like in the weight room is we're going to stack our heavy days on those same intense throwing days. We'd call that a consolidation of stressors. That way, when our body's tanked, those energy systems are tanked. The next day, we're not then going into the weight room, even though we might feel better than if we did it while we were tired from throwing. We're then, when our body's trying to recover, we're then pushing it again. And it's a different way, but we talked about earlier how these things are Venn diagrams with a lot of overlap. And part of what we're looking to change by doing something like a plyo velocity day or a bat speed day, those are physical properties that we're influencing. And then if we're crushing those in the weight room the next day, again, like I said, we're fighting to get back to baseline. So those intense days are going to be intense. And then those days in between, those are great days to work on the range of motion, the stability, joint range of motion, accumulating volume at low intensities on the skill side. It doesn't mean we're not getting anything done. It's just targeted and calculated.
And I think it's just hard for a lot of people to understand that unless you're actually collecting some data about how training is going, and you are doing that in parallel with checking the progressions in the weight room, sometimes you just don't know that you're in the hole, and you're digging yourself further and further and further in the hole, because you're screwing up your ability to have like that general adaptation of the super compensation effect of like, you actually got recovered, right? You got recovered, and now we have that effect. That's just how human beings function if given the opportunity to recover. So when you're doing like the 6 day a week, 7 day a week training cycle, that's just like intensity, and it makes you worse, it's kind of your own fault. So come back to just what we said a little while ago about like needing a qualified professional, whether that's us in a remote capacity, whether that's us in an in-person capacity, whether it's someone in your community, like you gotta find someone that can give you some of this guidance to try to figure this stuff out. Because like, I think sometimes we talk about things like, we'll just cruise through like, general adaptation syndrome and supercompensation and RPE levels, and like we'll just fire this stuff out. And if I'm just like if I'm a dad that's like an accountant, right, and I didn't lift a lot, and I just maybe did like a lot of cardio because that's what I thought I needed to do, stay healthy, and somebody's trying to talk to me about, I have a young player who wants to get stronger and all this stuff, like it can get really complex. And I think, a lot of the stuff that you've talked about here requires a little bit of a deft touch to navigate, whether that's exercise selection, trying to decide what type of like phase of programming you want to be in, how to maximize recovery, how to train alongside the skill stuff. Like it is a technically complex undertaking.
For sure.
So like both things can be true. The American Society of Pediatricians can say that it is safe for kids like 8 and up to do resistance training, but it also can be true that like that resistance training, that curriculum should be stewarded by someone who really knows what they're doing.
Definitely.
Because there's just there's a lot of ways that you can screw it up, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And not even like screw it up in, I think, the way that we would be familiar with, which is just like I get injured and something bad happens.
Right.
It's like you're screwing it up by way of screwing up your ability to make gains.
Right. It's the opportunity cost again.
Right. Yep.
And that like that time, that 8 to 12, where you should be training like aerobic base, speed, coordination, enjoying.
Yeah.
Like you talked about, building that relationship with training. You can get those things done then. So like that's when you need to get those things done, because once you're progressing, it's going to be time to work on something else.
Yeah.
And if that's an easy way to get stuck 12 months behind your peers.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about stuff in our industry, like pitcher shouldn't bench press, right? Think about that as both something that is just like factually incorrect, but something that somebody said because they saw a pitcher get worse when they started to do some type of bench press routine.
Sure.
It's not that the issue was the bench press. It's the way that it was programmed. It's the way that it was managed. It was the way that it was integrated or not in their skill training.
Yeah.
So like, if you can't get through a benching program correctly, if you can't design one correctly, if you don't have the help of a qualified professional to help you do that, then you probably shouldn't bench press.
Yep.
But I mean, also there is so much information out there nowadays, like places like us, places in your community, people that just like have gone through this stuff. You should just get a good bench program, right? That's the real answer. The real answer is don't bench press. It's find a good program.
And like, our industry, from the youth level all the way up, arm injuries are a thing that is talked about all the time. Do you feel like they would make a non-zero impact on the injury rates if kids were lifting younger? Like 13, 14, when you're advocating they should start, do you feel like that would remove a lot of the high school, torn UCLs that we hear about and stuff like that? Like, is it a function, not entirely, but in some way, of a strength deficit that's causing some of this?
Is it going to mitigate some of the risk? The answer is like yes. The short answer is yes, because like when we think about like an injury occurs when load exceeds capacity. Something happened that part of the body wasn't ready for. And so preparing more parts of the body to accept more force in more positions is going to mitigate some degree of risk. There's always going to be injuries, especially like something like the throw, where it happens so fast.
Yeah.
There's so much torque. There's just so much. Like we're not going to achieve those in a weight room, right? And that's why things like the pulse, where we're tracking like throwing workloads, like that side of it is so important. Like the workload, monitoring our acute to chronic workload ratios and integrating those things is so important. But absolutely, I mean, when we think about like building the capacity to do things physically, like having a more robust physical system that's executing the specific task is going to have us less vulnerable to things. And it's also going to benefit less. It's going to benefit on those specific, like the Tommy John or labrums, things like that. But it's also going to benefit in the general, the pitcher who pops a hammy covering first or something stupid like that, right? Where
Koda Senga tore his calf coming off the mound celebrating. Is that how that happened? Like, I mean, this happens with like really, really, really high level athletes sometimes. Yeah. And it's freaky, but it's demand outside of capacity.
Right. And you're not going to get those to zero. Like I said, there's always going to be freak injuries, right? But it's when you have an injury like that happen and you go, oh, like he got hurt sprinting. Had he been sprinting? No. Like at least you want to be able to say like, I was prepared for the task and something crazy happened.
Yeah.
The crazy thing shouldn't be that you didn't prepare for the task.
Yeah.
It's how I feel about how there's this like rash of 50 articles about the state of our sport and injuries that happen in like mid to late March and early April.
Every year.
And then not a whole lot of injuries happen the rest of the year. And it's like, what are we going to do about this? It's like, well, maybe they should, be in better throwing shape when they show up for spring training.
Yeah, probably
and not just pick up a ball for the first time.
Yeah, probably should have handled November through February a little bit different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think the demand exceeding capacity thing is just the most succinct way to explain
Yeah,
it.
that was perfect. Yeah.
Because that's exactly why I have two family members that both tore Achilles playing pickleball in the last
Pickleball.
9 months.
That's impressive.
Joe and Jacques, shout out to you guys. I love you very much.
Wow.
All right, I got another meeting to get to in 7
I have one
minutes.
more question.
I know you got one.
Okay. So you work with a lot of high-level athletes that come in here. College guys, pro guys. How many of them would you say their training age surprises you? Like high-level athletes coming in and they're just like, yeah, I started lifting 2 years ago. I started lifting recently. And you're just like, so you made it all the way through high school with like barely lifting?
There's not too many. There's like weird caveats to that where it's like a guy will like not have done a front squat or not have done an RDL and you're like, but like be like really good at like a landmine press or something like that. And it's like just like the specific structure that they happen to get on with the org that they were with or something like that, where it's like, how are you goblet lateral lunging more than you sumo deadlift? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
like really specific. Like he's been training for years. He is good at like a lot of the things, but then there's like just zeros like stacked in there because if I could have had them 3 or 4 years before, like when they got signed by the org, then it was like pretty much zero.
Right.
And that's different in different baseball cultures. Like when we work with athletes from like Japan, the training is so different. Right. And so then like it's a totally different set of exercises that they might be like extremely proficient in and extremely deficient in. So it's pretty rare to see guys that are like totally low training age, but there's guys that have like I said, like gaps in there, like their training age relative to the gaps that are in it is a really unique combo that you wouldn't really ever see otherwise.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I was going to pull something about the IMTPs, but I lost it. So, all right, gang.
That's fascinating. I could ask you a lot more questions about the difference between the international and how what those kind of athletes look like differently. That's a fascinating thing that I never really thought about.
Yeah. Well, and why, obviously.
Right. I mean, what do they train differently than we do, and how does that impact their bodies?
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. I think the first thing that comes to mind is just like it's reflective of our culture, right? And our culture revolves around a very structured gameplay, which dictates schedule.
Right.
And it just inherently mitigates if you follow that system. And you're following that system because everybody's in we're all doing the same thing. How could we all be wrong?
Right.
Well, we could all be wrong because we're getting dog walked by people that do the thing differently, So yeah. Feel complete?
Yeah.
Okay. I know we got a lot more that we could do, but we can't do these like Joe Rogan style yet. Do you guys want that? You want 3-hour podcasts from your guys here?
Well, didn't you ask that a couple weeks ago? And they were like, yeah, give us the one full 2.5 hour instead of cutting that out.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. I don't know what we're going to talk about next time. Oh, we have more guests. We had a bunch more guests. Chad, I know you listen to the pod. Get your Zoom ready. We're going to figure this out. Axbat.com, code DL20, Detroit Lions 20 will get you 20% off. Power Bat, Youth Arnola Smash Bat, best $99 and $79 you can spend respectively. Skills Go Complete Youth Baseball Training Manual has a ton of curriculum about LTAD, about a general adaptation, about super compensation. It's all in the book because if you want to execute a developmentally progressive approach to youth baseball, whether that's for a person that you made or a team that you're coaching, you have to understand that stuff. You just have to. If you want to understand why we throw 3 days a week, why we periodize the intensity of our throwing programs, it's all related to the same thing that's related back to HP and LTAD. It's all the same thing. It's just how humans get better at stuff. And if I'm going to listen to a smart guy like Whitey tell me that stuff, then I have to listen, and that's what's going to be in the program for the book. We're going to go do the thing. That's all I got.
Thanks, Whitey.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Whitey.
thank you guys.
He is Connor. He is Jeremy. I'm Devin. We are Down by Law. Catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.